Good evening. This is Rahul Magan here. Is a Group Chief Executive Officer, Treasury Consulting, and also a second year law student. Like I said in my first video, which has already been uploaded on the YouTube, whereby we cover one of my favorite topics, which is called alternate investment funds. This is the second video pertaining to alternate investment funds. And I would further repeat that not only this video, but also all the videos which would be coming in the near future, because I would be covering the complete cycle of alternate investment fund. In all the videos, we would be country agnostic. Now, I further repeat that country agnostic means that we won't be covering any country specifically. We would be covering the structure of alternate investment fund. Yes, I wish to cover the Irish alternate investment funds, United States alternate investment funds, Luxembourg and Frankfurt alternate investment funds. But having said that, that completely depends on the schedule and the time availability. Because unfortunately, the time is very limited. And in this limited time, I need to cover many things. In this video, I would be covering a very important document which I cited from the internet. And this document is known as Confidential Private Placement Memorandum. Don't worry, this document is not a filled document. This document is a blank document, but this is only a schema. So basically in information technology, there is a thing called schema and semantics. Schema means the overall structure. Semantics means the coding. So this document, which I downloaded from the internet, this document is schema as well as semantics. But having said that, one thing we really need to understand as far as the alternate investment funds are concerned is that the schema varies from country to country. And more importantly, in some special jurisdiction, please take a note that I'm using a word special jurisdiction without quoting any specific name, who are known as tax haven. Because in different tax havens also we have few special jurisdictions. There is an issue as far as the semantics and syntax is concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, like I told you that when it comes to alternate investment funds, they are generally designed either as a company, either as a trust, or as a pooled investment vehicle. But like I said, like in India, for a simplistic example, in India we are having Indian Trust Act 1882. And generally we are having public trust also, we are having private trust also in India. Theoretically, we can have hybrid trust also, but technically speaking, I completely fail to understand what is hybrid trust, honestly. Similarly, different countries of the globe, they have their own trust guidelines. Henceforth, one important thing. So example, tomorrow, if I am evaluating any Singapore AIF, then I cannot rely on the Trust Act, which is Indian Trust Act 1882. I would be relying on the Singapore Trust Act. And ladies and gentlemen, one important thing which we should not forget is the arbitration clause in AIF. In any investment vehicle, whether this is onshore, which means in your country, whether this is offshore, outside your country, or whether it is near shore, which means not very far from your country, arbitration or any form of dispute can happen at any given point of time. And it is highly unfortunate that when it comes to investment agreements, and especially when the big HNIs, high net worth individuals, very, very big people, private equity and venture capitalist firms are involved, in some cases there are issues with arbitration agreements. On time to time basis, these things are coming on Google and I continue to track them. It is fairly impossible for us to make videos on all the topics. Henceforth, ladies and gentlemen, we really need to understand that alternate investment fund designing, whether this is a trust, whether this is a company, or whether this is any other form, which is known as juristic personality. Now, that juristic personality is completely dependent on the laws or the foreign jurisdictional laws. That is something which we really need to understand. Typically speaking, in India, the alternate investment funds prefer the trust route. They have their own logic, and I don't think it is wise to covering that logic, but they prefer the trust route, followed by companies and LLP route. Having said that, we really need to delve down into Indian Trust Act 1882 to understand why alternate investment funds prefer the trust route. But having said that, if the time would permit, we would go. If the time do not permit, then we may not be able to answer that. We also need to understand that alternate investment funds are sophisticated investment tools, which practically means that, like if I speak from a hardcore Indian perspective, then alternate investment funds are divided into three categories, which is category 1, category 2, and category 3. Simplistically speaking, category 2 is considered as a residual category, which means if things do not fall in category 1 and category 3, then it falling under category 2. Ladies and gentlemen, my personal opinion is that in Indian context, category 3 is considered as complex. They are dealing with complex instruments, while followed by category 1 and last is category 2. But like I said, it varies from country to country. Henceforth, when it comes to the word called sophisticated investment vehicles, this word needs to understand very, very carefully. Let me study a disclaimer note which I found out in this document. But before I study the disclaimer note, please take a note that in this disclaimer note, the language used may or might not be a similar language used in the disclaimer note which you are holding. Ladies and gentlemen, I would be highlighting few words in this disclaimer note. But like I said very clearly, that it is fairly impossible for me to cover the holistic cycle of alternate investment fund in one video. We may need 70 or probably more than 100 videos to cover alternate investment fund, and this is only second part. This confidential memorandum is issued in connection with and relates to an investment in the units of fund or scheme. Now, first of all, we need to understand the difference between fund and scheme. Ladies and gentlemen, fund and scheme both are completely different. A fund can have 200 schemes. Example, debt fund. This debt fund can have 200 schemes, but scheme cannot have a fund. Very, very simplistically speaking, each scheme in itself is a fund. But having said that, this is a subset, and the set is the larger fund. So example, there is a very big private equity firm who is holding a debt fund of $100 billion, assuming. And this $100 billion of debt fund, which that private equity fund is holding, this is divided into 10 schemes. Tick, 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 this. Now, these 10 schemes may or might not have equal corpus, may or might not have a different same risk, may or might not have the potential default, may or might not have an element of credit risk. Henceforth, ladies and gentlemen, one very important thing which we need to learn in alternate investment funds is whether we are investing in a fund or we are investing in a scheme. Kindly note that if we are investing in a fund, then there is a concept called fund related document. That is completely a separate product that you will get from the investment manager of alternate investment fund. Alternatively, if you are investing in a scheme, then of course there is a document which pertains to complete information of the scheme, but also you need to link that document with the original fund. Ladies and gentlemen, you also need to understand that sometimes the fund houses are creating the bankruptcy proof vehicles also, which means there is a very big fund and that big fund is holding 100 billion of debt investments collected from A, B, C, D, E investors. And they are creating out of this 100 billion, assuming 25 billion, they allocated to the duration of Latin American securities. And in this Latin American securities, they are investing where the credit rating is either B or less than C. It means the element of default is definitely there, but that doesn't mean the default would happen. In this eventuality, it is the duty of the fund house to create a bankruptcy remote vehicle. But if they've not been able to create that, they would definitely be hedging using one of the finest instrument which we are having, which is called CDS, Credit Default Swap, or there are various instruments like Credit Default Swap. Henceforth, let me repeat that in the units of fund and scheme. So please be careful that are you talking about fund or you talking about scheme? Please take a note of that. The fund and scheme is registered with XYZ regulator. This memorandum doesn't constitute an offer or a solicitation of an offer to subscribe in the units described herein. Remember that units. Suppose there is I'll go with the same, a big P fund, the debt fund of $100 billion, 20 billion is allocated to Latin American securities, and suppose the unit turn out to be €100, $100, assuming each unit. Now this is called net asset value. Generally, people believe that net asset value do not change, but I differ. Net asset value change. It completely depends on the credit risk that fund is taking. If the fund is taking more than sufficient credit risk, then there is a high probability that net asset value can come down drastically anytime. While if the fund is taking low level risk and it is hedged by an instrument called CDS, Credit Default Swap, then definitely there is a probability that the mild risk is there, but risk is there. If it is low risk, then it is up to a fund manager. But ladies and gentlemen, having said that, the net asset value cannot be intact. It is a myth that the net investment value is intact. It is not intact. It completely dependent on the element of credit risk the fund is carrying. Any person other than the person whose name appears on the cover page of this memorandum, no person other than such person receiving a copy of this memorandum may treat the same as constituting an offer or solicitation. Like I said, this is only a placement memorandum agreement. There are various we have in public, but very important point which I would like to highlight is that the sponsors, whether it is legally a right decision to mention the name of the sponsors in the relevant private information memorandum, or answer is no. This is a highly debatable question, because when it comes to fit and proper guidelines as far as the sponsors is concerned, this varies from country to country. And I'm not in a position to answer, because since the world do not have a unique